You wouldn't think a movie that highlights how unrated and edgy it is as somehow being sanitized or woke in a way that emotes She-Hulk. Yet the Toxic Avenger remake did just that. Let's see how. For the first time in 17 years, DC flat out beat Marvel at the box office, with James Gunn's Superman beating out both Fantastic Four, the Thunderbolts, and palette-swapped Captain America and Hulk to be the reigning superhero champ this year. There is one more also-ran though, and that would be the Toxic Avenger, or just Toxie for short. Short being something of a recurring theme here. But before we get into that, let's begin with some background to set the stage, as some context is important here. The original Toxic Avenger was of course a micro-budget, balls-to-the-walls gonzo production, where nothing was off-limits, not even children being dispatched with in brutal ways. Yet it developed such a cult following that it practically built the indie production company Troma Pictures, where incidentally James Gunn of Superman fame also started out. So, Troma Pictures, the house that Toxie built, made 4 Toxic Avenger movies themselves between 1984 and the year 2000, and in addition to that, they licensed out the making of an animated spin-off titled Toxic Crusaders, which in turn spawned video games, a toy line, and comic book adaptations. But until recently, the franchise has been dormant. Today, there is a new video game and comic book series, both of which are of course made on license. And crucially, so is this reboot, as it first and foremost is a product of Legendary Pictures, not of Troma proper. What that means, right off the bat, even if it's made on a very low budget by usual Legendary standards, is that however much they may try to be edgy for a mainstream movie, there's too many shareholders and too many special interest groups that those shareholders will not want to append. That there was never any chance this movie could ever go where the original movies did. Legendary did try to push it to the limit in the areas where a mainstream studio are comfortable with pushing it though, by way of landing Macon Blair, the writer and director of I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore, to write and direct the remake back in 2019. Under his watch, the movie did come together, and filming was actually concluded by the end of 2021. Keep that in mind as we get into the review here. The movie was made 4 years ago, because that is going to be important later on. The finished movie was first screened at Fantastic Fest in September of 2023, but despite only pushing it in safe and acceptable ways, word from unnamed producers was that the movie was so violent and edgy as to be unreleasable. That clearly was not the case, yet no major distributor wanted it. Meaning it was picked up by a number of smaller distributors all over the world, including in the US, where it was picked up by Cineverse. What I found interesting going into the movie though, was that as of the making of this video, which is still comparatively early days, the movie has been very well received by critics, sitting at 86% at Rotten Tomatoes. That's a pretty darn solid reception for a supposed unreleasable movie. For contrast, the original movie sits at 71% on Rotten Tomatoes, but don't be fooled by that, as most of the positive reviews behind that score are modern reviews, published in conjunction with later Blu-ray and 4K releases, when the movie was already an institution and a certified cult classic. At the time of its original release back in 1984, however, the critical reception ranged from mixed to extremely negative, with even the most positive of reviews labeling it a funny spoof, but still trash. The point I'm making here is that if Rotten Tomatoes had been around when it came out in 1984, the original Toxic Avenger would have been labeled as rotten as it gets, because the contemporary critics by and large were offended by it. By contrast, the professional establishment critics of 2025 found the remake to be fun and wholly inoffensive right off the bat, meaning Legendary were successful in making a movie that pushed things to the limit, but only where Hollywood deemed it safe to push, and nowhere else, which makes for a Toxic Avenger that sticks out quite a bit from those that came before, and not just in height. With that, Let's get into my review. First and foremost, the movie is sanitized, and the prime example of that is its location. The original was set in Tromaville, New Jersey, a nod to the studio as well as the term trauma. But this remake, of course, had to get more creative than that, as it's set in St. Roma's village. But the sign for the city is old and weathered, some key letters no longer visible, so it presents as Tromaville. Here we meet Winston Goose, portrayed by Peter Dinklage, who single-handedly got every other actor of similar height as him inadvertently cancelled in Hollywood. Here he is a single-step dad and works as a cleaner for the evil BTH company, a company which pollutes the environment something fierce and which makes snake oil pharmaceutical products that ultimately only make people sick. Goose is also sick, suffering an undisclosed brain disease, which is treatable with the right drugs, but his BTH insurance plan won't cover that treatment. When he petitions the evil CEO of BTH to help him out anyway, he happens to be at the wrong place at the wrong time and is dispatched and dumped into a vat of chemical waste by an insane clown posse-like band that moonlights as hitmen for BTH. In keeping with how the sludge worked in the original, Goose is then turned into Toxie, a hideously deformed creature of superhuman size and strength. Relative to his own stature, of course, which means that in absolute terms, this Toxie is still something of a runt. Case in point, the physical Toxie performance isn't done by Peter Dinklage in makeup, but by Luisa Guerrero, a female multi-talent who dwarfs Dinklage, but she's still on the short side by any other metric. In other words, this movie was an easy paycheck for Dinklage, who only had to show up on set for the first third of the movie. Beyond that, it's a Mandalorian-style voiceover job. He is good, mind you. Not as good as in Dexter Resurrection, of course, but still good. And if you wonder if him being, shall we say, vertically challenged plays any part in the movie, the answer is no. Everyone and everything treats him like your regular-sized guy of the down-on-his-luck variety. The movie is perfectly height-blind and very, very woke in a way I had hoped we would never see again. As I alluded to earlier though, the movie was sitting on the shelf for quite a while before it was released, which in other times in history wouldn't have mattered much. But right now, with a certain pendulum just having swung the other way, it means the movie was already dated before it was even released. More specifically, this is a Toxic Avenger remake for the Biden era, in that it was made by filmmakers residing in an echo chamber, who deemed themselves to be good and virtuous, and of course, on the right side of history. So obviously, they thought it was only natural that they should use the movie as a platform to first and foremost signal their own virtue and adherence to the message, and secondarily, to push a narrative they seemingly took for granted all their industry peers, and the vast majority of their audience, would agree with. But I'm not so sure. The primary villain here, of course, is the evil company BTH, which you might think is a stand-in for Big Pharma, an institution most would agree have some villainous aspects to it, but then you'd be wrong. Legendary would never take on Big Pharma, especially not in 2021 when this was made. No, Big Pharma are the makers of the drug that Goose needs for his unspecified brain condition. Instead, the primary villain here is Little Pharma, the independent companies that make supplements designed to augment your health and limit the effects of aging beyond what a steady diet and regular workout regime you already should follow can do in isolation. Companies that advertise with the likes of Joe Rogan, and full disclosure, on this channel, those are the main villains of this movie. But since there is a main villain, there is also a secondary villain, and that, dear viewer, that would be the likes of me, Nerdrotic, the Critical Drinker, Doomcock, and every other content creator like that, as well as every last one of you who are watching right now. You are all the villains here, and just like Marvel's She-Hulk, this movie makes no secret about that. Remember how in the original Toxic Avenger, there is this band of colorful villains sticking up a fast food joint? Well, that happens in this remake too, only now they're not colorful villains. They're what the media used to dub toxic fans, and they targeted that specific fast food joint because it had just gender bent its iconic logo and mascot, turning it from a male walking burger into a female walking burger or some such. These toxic fans, self-proclaimed activists, didn't like this inevitable change in the name of DEI, and for that, they had to be dispatched of in gruesome and gory ways. Beyond that, there's a ton of nods to the original, as well as some franchise staples that fans will be sure to appreciate. In short, while the movie all in all is mostly harmless fun, it is a product of toxic creatives, running free for what was a very limited but instantly identifiable time frame in Hollywood history, and the movie is as such adversely affected by that. Does that change your mind about seeing it? If indeed you were going to in the first place, and if you did see it, what did you think about it? Let me know in the comments.